Welcome to my channel. I am Jade Malice. If the darkness in the corner of your room just moved, it means one of the uninvited guests from my story has already reached you. From which city? And at what time are you watching us? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like so you don't get lost in the dark. Now, the story begins. Prepare yourselves. The attic where the jinn waited. When Daniel Harper inherited his grandmother's abandoned house in the French countryside, he planned to sell it within a week. The stone cottage had been empty for nearly 20 years, hidden behind tall pine trees and surrounded by a silence that seemed almost unnatural. The locals offered only one warning before he accepted the keys. Never open the attic after sunset. Daniel dismissed the advice as another old village superstition. He spent the first day cleaning the dusty rooms and sorting through forgotten furniture. Everything appeared ordinary until nightfall. Just after midnight, a heavy thud echoed above his bedroom. Then another. Slow, deliberate, as though someone were walking across the attic floor. He grabbed a flashlight and climbed the narrow wooden stairs. The attic door stood slightly open. He was certain he had locked it earlier. Inside, moonlight slipped through a tiny round window, revealing old trunks covered in grey sheets. The air smelled of ash and ancient wood. Then he noticed something impossible. The dust covering the floor was untouched, except for dozens of bare footprints. They did not lead toward the door. They emerged from the darkest corner of the attic and stopped in the middle of the room. Daniel followed them. Hidden beneath an old carpet was a black wooden chest, covered with strange symbols carved into the lid. The lock had already been broken. As he touched the chest, every light in the house went out. The silence lasted only a heartbeat. A whisper filled the attic. Not one voice. Hundreds. Speaking in a language he could not understand. The chest slowly opened by itself. It was empty. At least it appeared to be. Something cold brushed against his shoulder. He turned. No one. Then another whisper came from directly behind him. "We are finally awake." Daniel fled downstairs. He locked every door and called the police. 2 officers arrived within 20 minutes. They searched every room. Nothing. No footprints. No chest. No sign that anyone had entered the house. One officer smiled politely. "You've had a long day." Daniel almost believed him, until the officer reached the attic stairs. He suddenly froze, his radio filled with violent static. A deep growl echoed above them. The older officer slowly looked upward. His face lost all color. Without warning, every window in the house shattered inward. The lights exploded. The attic door slammed shut. Something enormous struck it from the inside. Once, twice, then silence. The officers forced the door open. The attic was empty. Only the black chest stood in the center of the room. Its lid was open again. One of the officers stepped closer. "I don't like this." A shadow detached itself from the ceiling. It was too large to be human. Its shape twisted like smoke, but inside it burned dozens of glowing eyes. The room became impossibly cold. The officer raised his flashlight. The beam disappeared into the darkness without touching anything. Then the shadow moved. The flashlight fell to the floor. The officer vanished before he could even scream. Not dragged away. Not pulled into the darkness. He simply ceased to exist. His partner fired twice. The bullets struck the wooden beams. The shadow rushed toward him. The gun clattered onto the floor. A second later, the room was silent again. Only Daniel remained, frozen, unable to move. The whispers returned. We do not haunt houses. We inherit them. The black shape slowly circled him, but never came closer. Instead, it drifted back into the open chest. The lid closed on its own. Morning finally arrived. Backup officers searched the property. Both policemen had disappeared without leaving a single trace. The official report blamed structural collapse and confusion during the night. No bodies were ever found. The house was sealed permanently. Months later, demolition workers arrived. They succeeded in tearing down every wall except the attic. No machine could break the old beams. The foreman ordered the place abandoned. Years passed. The forest slowly swallowed the ruins. Travelers sometimes reported hearing whispers drifting through the trees after sunset. Some even claimed to see a lone attic standing where no house remained. Its single round window glowed with a faint amber light. Inside, dark figures gathered around an open black chest. Waiting, not for someone to enter, but for someone curious enough to believe the house had finally become empty. The Jinn beneath Blackwater Pier. The old Blackwater Pier stretched into the cold sea like a forgotten finger, pointing toward endless darkness. Once filled with fishermen, tourists, and laughter, it had become a place everyone avoided after sunset. Over the past 10 years, 12 people had disappeared there without leaving a single trace. The police blamed the tides, accidents, and the unstable wooden structure. The locals whispered a different story. They believed something lived beneath the pier. Something that had never belonged to the sea. Detective Ryan Mercer arrived one stormy evening to investigate the latest disappearance. A fisherman had vanished only minutes after calling emergency services. His final words were chilling. They're walking on the water. Ryan searched the deserted pier with only his flashlight cutting through the thick fog. The waves crashed below, but another sound slowly emerged between them. Soft footsteps, wood creaking, whispers in a language he had never heard. Then he saw them. 3 tall figures stood at the far end of the pier. Their bodies were hidden beneath long black robes that moved even though there was no wind. Their faces remained invisible beneath impossible darkness. When Ryan called out, they did not answer. Instead, one of them slowly raised a hand. The sea instantly became silent. Every wave stopped. Even the rain froze in the air for a heartbeat. Then the whispers returned. This time, they came from everywhere. They have forgotten us. Ryan moved closer. The figures disappeared. Only wet footprints remained on the old wooden planks. They did not lead away. They ended abruptly beside the railing. A sudden scream echoed beneath the pier. Ryan rushed to the edge and aimed his flashlight downward. Dozens of pale faces floated just beneath the surface, not swimming, watching. Every face belonged to a person reported missing over the last decade. Their eyes slowly opened. At the same moment, dark shapes rose from the water. They were enormous. Humanoid. Their bodies seemed woven from smoke and seawater. The old stories had named them Jinn, spirits that could cross into the human world where fear was strongest. One by one, the ghostly faces vanished beneath the waves. The Jinn climbed onto the pier without making a sound. Where their feet touched the wood, black marks spread like burnt fingerprints. Ryan drew his weapon. The first shot echoed across the sea. The bullet passed straight through the nearest figure. The Jinn tilted its head. A fisherman, who had secretly followed Ryan, stepped backward in terror. Before Ryan could warn him, darkness wrapped around the man like a living cloak. His scream lasted only a second. When the shadow withdrew, nothing remained except his lantern, gently rolling across the pier. The other jinn advanced. Another officer arrived from the entrance and shouted Ryan's name. The shadows rushed forward. The beam of the officer's flashlight suddenly went dark. His voice stopped. Only his radio fell onto the wooden boards, still repeating fragments of unfinished words. Ryan ran toward the shore as the whispers grew louder behind him. The fog twisted into towering human shapes. Every missing victim now stood silently along both sides of the pier. They did not attack. They simply watched, as though warning him not to turn around. He reached the entrance just before dawn. The first sunlight touched the sea. The jinn dissolved into black mist and disappeared beneath the waves. The official investigation concluded that the victims had drowned during the storm. No bodies were ever recovered. Ryan never accepted that explanation. Weeks later, security cameras overlooking the harbor captured something impossible. At exactly 3:13 every morning, 3 dark figures walked slowly across the surface of the sea toward Blackwater Pier. They carried no reflections, no footprints, only shadows. The final recording was made 1 month later. It showed Ryan standing alone at the end of the pier, calmly staring into the water. No one had seen him leave his home that night. The camera recorded him lowering his flashlight and stepping forward as though someone had called his name. Just before he vanished into the darkness, 3 unfamiliar voices whispered together. The pier is never empty. When the police reviewed the footage frame by frame, Ryan was already gone. Only 3 black-robed figures remained, waiting in complete silence for the next visitor, who believed the old stories were nothing more than legends. The lobby that never checked anyone out. Detective Nathan Brooks had visited countless hotels during his career, but none unsettled him like the abandoned Grand Ashcroft Hotel on the coast of northern England. The building had been closed for nearly 25 years after a mysterious electrical fire. Yet locals insisted that its lobby lights still glowed every night just after midnight. Several emergency calls had recently reached the local police station. Every caller described the same thing. They had seen people entering the hotel through the revolving doors, but no one had ever come back out. Nathan accepted the case with little interest in ghost stories. He believed abandoned buildings attracted curious trespassers and frightened imaginations. Still, he drove to the deserted hotel shortly before midnight. The entrance doors were covered with dust. The parking lot was empty. Everything appeared lifeless. Then the old clock tower struck 12. One by one, the chandeliers inside the lobby flickered to life. The revolving door began turning slowly on its own. Nathan stepped inside. Warm air greeted him, carrying the faint scent of polished wood and fresh flowers, although the hotel had supposedly been empty for decades. The marble floor reflected the golden light perfectly. Behind the reception desk stood a concierge in an old-fashioned uniform. He smiled politely. "Good evening, Detective. We've been expecting your arrival." Nathan frowned. "My arrival?" The concierge nodded without answering. An antique guest register rested on the counter. Curious, Nathan opened it. The last page already contained his name. The check-in time matched the current minute. The checkout column was blank. Before he could ask another question, the elevator bell rang. Its doors slid open by themselves. Inside, no one stood waiting. A quiet voice drifted out. "Lobby level." Nathan ignored the elevator and continued searching the ground floor. The hotel restaurant was empty. The lounge contained dozens of chairs arranged neatly around coal fireplaces. Yet every chair faced the lobby, as though invisible guests were watching whoever entered. Then he heard footsteps above him. Slow, measured, impossible. The upper floors had collapsed years earlier, according to official reports. He looked up. There was no ceiling, only darkness. The footsteps continued. A suitcase rolled across the marble floor by itself. It stopped directly beside Nathan. A faded luggage tag hung from its handle. Instead of a room number, it bore a single message. "You forgot to leave." The lobby lights dimmed. The chandelier began swaying, although the air was perfectly still. Nathan reached for his radio. Only static answered. Then dozens of voices whispered together, "Welcome back." He turned toward the reception desk. The concierge had vanished. In his place stood an old brass room key. Attached to it was another tag. Room 0. The elevator bell rang again. This time, the doors opened to reveal a long hallway that could not possibly fit inside the building. Every door along the corridor stood slightly open. Soft conversations echoed from within. Laughter, music, children playing. Yet the hallway remained completely empty. Nathan stepped back. The revolving door behind him had disappeared. Only a solid wall remained. The whispers grew louder. Every chair in the lobby slowly turned toward him, one after another. Without a sound, a shadow appeared beneath the reception desk. It rose slowly until it resembled a hotel guest dressed in dark clothing. Its face remained hidden beneath a wide hat. It spoke without moving. "No one leaves before checkout." Suddenly, every clock in the lobby began ticking at once. Nathan grabbed the brass key and threw it across the room. The instant it struck the marble floor, every light went out. He ran blindly toward the entrance. His shoulder crashed into glass. The revolving door had returned. He stumbled outside into the cold night. Behind him, the hotel was dark once again. The next morning, investigators searched the building. The lobby was empty. Dust covered every surface. There was no reception desk, no chandelier, no furniture. Only a single guest register lay on the cracked floor. Its pages were completely blank, except for the final line. Nathan Brooks, checked in. 12 a.m. The checkout space remained empty. Since that night, Nathan refuses to enter any hotel lobby after midnight. Because every so often, while passing a reception desk, he hears a courteous voice behind him, quietly asking, "Welcome back, sir. Will you be staying with us forever this time?" But the caravan that should never have stopped. The old highway cutting through the lonely moorlands of northern England was almost empty after sunset. Endless fields disappeared beneath rolling fog, and abandoned gas stations stood like forgotten monuments along the roadside. Mark Sullivan, a 32-year-old documentary filmmaker, was traveling alone in his newly restored caravan, searching for isolated places to film for his next project. He laughed whenever locals warned him about cursed roads or haunted forests. To him, every legend had a rational explanation. Just before midnight, his GPS suddenly lost signal. Seconds later, the engine died. The caravan rolled to a silent stop beside an abandoned chapel swallowed by darkness. Mark tried restarting the engine. Nothing. Then he heard 3 slow knocks. Not on the door. From underneath the caravan. He grabbed his flashlight and stepped outside. The cold night was perfectly still. The beam revealed nothing beneath the vehicle except gravel and wet grass. As he stood up, he noticed something impossible. The chapel behind him had no entrance, only cracked stone walls, yet a dim light flickered inside. Back in the caravan, the radio turned on by itself. Static filled the speakers. Then a deep whisper emerged. "Do not invite them!" The transmission ended. A heavy silence followed. Moments later, soft footsteps circled the caravan. Slow, patient, always just beyond the windows. Mark looked outside. No one. The footsteps continued. Then every curtain moved at once, although the air inside was completely still. He locked every door. The knocking returned. This time, from the roof. Something walked above him. Its steps were too light to belong to a person, yet too deliberate to be an animal. Suddenly, a woman's frightened scream echoed across the fields. Without thinking, Mark rushed outside. About 50 meters away stood another caravan he had somehow failed to notice. Its door was wide open. Inside, the lights flickered violently. A family of 4 sat perfectly still around the table. A father, a mother, 2 children. Their eyes were fixed on the ceiling. None of them blinked. Then, one by one, they slowly turned toward Mark. Their mouths opened together. But the voices that came out did not belong to them. "Leave before they see you." The lights exploded. Darkness swallowed the caravan. A terrible cracking sound echoed inside. The screams stopped as suddenly as they had begun. When Mark's flashlight finally worked again, the caravan was empty. The family had vanished. Only 4 cups of tea remained on the table, still warm. Behind him came a whisper. Too late. He turned. Tall shadows emerged from the fog. The bodies resembled drifting smoke. But inside, the darkness burned countless pale eyes. The jinn moved without footsteps, gliding silently across the ground. Every nearby sound disappeared. Even the wind seemed afraid. Mark ran. The shadows followed, without haste. Each time he looked back, they were closer. A police patrol found his abandoned caravan the following morning. The engine worked perfectly. His camera was still recording. Detective Rachel Hughes reviewed the footage. At first, it showed only Mark speaking to the camera. Then, without warning, dozens of dark figures appeared around the caravan. The lens distorted. The microphone captured voices speaking an unknown language. One by one, invisible forces dragged terrified travelers from nearby caravans into the darkness beyond the headlights. No blood was visible, only screams. Then complete silence. The final seconds showed Mark hiding beneath a table, whispering prayers while the caravan shook violently. A shadow slowly bent down until its face filled the camera. It had no features except 2 glowing white eyes. It whispered in perfect English, "We never hunt the guilty, only those who stop when they are invited." The recording ended. Police searched the entire area for weeks. No bodies were ever found. The abandoned chapel did not exist on any map, and no trace of the second caravan was discovered. The case was closed without explanation. Months later, Detective Hughes received Mark's restored camera from the evidence locker. No one had touched it since the investigation. Curious, she played the final recording once more. This time, the ending was different. After the screen faded to black, the camera somehow continued filming. It showed the inside of another caravan. Rachel recognized the jacket hanging beside the door. It was her own. A slow knock echoed from beneath the floor. Then came the same whisper she had heard in the recording before. "Thank you for watching. Now we know where to find you." The basement beneath Ashcroft House. On the outskirts of a quiet village in northern England stood Ashcroft House, a large stone home abandoned for nearly 40 years. The windows were broken, ivy covered the walls, and no one could explain why every family that had tried to restore the property had left before finishing the work. Some blamed the isolation. Others whispered about the basement that was said to be larger on the inside than the house above it. Police Sergeant Ethan Collins had never believed such stories. When a local maintenance worker disappeared after entering the house to inspect its foundation, Ethan was assigned to investigate. The worker's van still stood outside, its engine cold, while his tools remained scattered across the front garden. Ethan entered the house just before sunset. The silence inside felt unnatural. Dust covered the furniture, but strangely, there were no cobwebs. It was as if someone had been walking through the rooms every day without leaving a single footprint. Near the kitchen, he discovered a heavy wooden door leading to the basement. It was already open. A cold draft rose from the darkness below. Switching on his flashlight, Ethan slowly descended the narrow stone staircase. The basement stretched much farther than the building should have allowed. Long corridors disappeared into darkness, lined with shelves filled with old jars, rusted tools, and clocks that had all stopped at exactly 1:47. Then he heard it. A faint knocking. 3 slow taps. They echoed from somewhere ahead. He followed the sound until he reached a small room with a single wooden chair. On the chair rested a dusty notebook. Opening it carefully, he found only one sentence repeated on every page. "Do not answer the voice below the stairs." Before Ethan could examine it further, a gentle whisper floated through the corridor. "Officer!" It sounded like the missing maintenance worker. "I'm trapped over here." Ethan hurried toward the voice, but every corridor looked identical. The whisper remained the same distance away no matter how fast he walked. Suddenly, the flashlight flickered. For a heartbeat, complete darkness surrounded him. When the light returned, the notebook had vanished. In its place stood an old elevator door built directly into the basement wall. There had been no elevator moments earlier. A small brass indicator above it displayed only one word. Below, the doors opened by themselves. Inside was an empty cabin with no buttons. Only a handwritten note was taped to the wall. "The basement has another level. It remembers everyone who enters." The doors began to close. Ethan stepped back just in time. As the elevator descended, he heard dozens of voices rising from below. Some cried for help. Others laughed quietly. One voice calmly whispered his full name. The corridor suddenly became freezing cold. Behind him came slow footsteps. He turned his flashlight toward the sound. A tall figure stood at the end of the hallway. It wore an old police uniform stained with dust. Its face remained hidden beneath the shadow of its cap. The figure slowly raised one hand and pointed toward the elevator shaft. Then it disappeared without making a sound. Ethan ran toward the stairs, but the staircase seemed longer than before. Each flight led to another. Each landing looked exactly the same. The knocking returned. Closer now. 3 taps. Always 3. Finally, he reached the kitchen and forced open the basement door. The evening sunlight blinded him for a moment. Outside, several police officers were waiting. They stared at him in confusion. "Where have you been?" one of them asked. Ethan looked at his watch. Barely 20 minutes had passed. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. "You've been missing for 3 days." A complete search of the house found nothing unusual. The basement measured only a few meters in length. There were no endless corridors, no elevator, no notebook. The missing maintenance worker was never found. Months later, Ethan returned to normal duty. One rainy evening, while reviewing old case files, he heard 3 slow knocks beneath his office floor. Tap, tap, tap. A maintenance hatch in the corner of the room slowly creaked open by itself. Cold air drifted upward. Then the same quiet voice he had heard in the basement whispered from the darkness below. "There's still 1 level deeper. And you've already been there." From that night onward, Ethan never entered another basement alone. Because sometimes, just before dawn, he hears an elevator arriving beneath the ground, waiting for someone to step inside. The highway where the jinn hunt. The M47 highway stretched across miles of empty countryside, connecting 2 quiet English towns. During the day, it looked ordinary, but after midnight, truck drivers whispered about a section known only as Black Mile. According to old stories, people who stopped their vehicles there were never truly alone. Some returned terrified. Others were never seen again. Police Sergeant Nathan Reed dismissed the rumors as superstition. His job was to investigate a series of unexplained traffic accidents that had taken place on the same lonely stretch of road. Every victim had been found inside an undamaged vehicle. There were no signs of struggle, no mechanical failures, and no evidence of another driver. Only one detail connected every case: the expressions on the victims' faces. Each of them had died staring at the passenger seat in absolute terror. Late one stormy evening, Nathan drove toward Black Mile alone. Rain hammered against the windshield while lightning briefly illuminated the endless highway. There were no other cars. At exactly 1:13 a.m., his police radio crackled. A frightened voice whispered, "They're standing on the road!" The transmission ended with a scream. Nathan accelerated. A few hundred meters ahead, he saw an abandoned sedan with its headlights still on. Its engine was running. The driver's door hung open. Inside, there was no one. Only muddy footprints leading into the darkness beyond the guardrail. Nathan followed them with his flashlight. The footprints stopped in the middle of an empty field. There was nowhere else to go. Then the temperature dropped. A cold wind circled him, although the surrounding trees remained perfectly still. From somewhere behind him came quiet laughter. Children. At least, it sounded like children. When Nathan turned around, several figures stood beside his patrol car. They were tall, impossibly thin, wrapped in shifting shadows instead of clothing. Their eyes reflected no light. They did not walk. They drifted. The oldest stories called them jinn. One of them slowly raised an arm. Instantly, the police radio exploded, with dozens of desperate voices speaking at once. Every missing driver, every emergency call, every final scream merged into one unbearable sound. Nathan covered his ears, but the voices continued inside his head. The nearest jinn tilted its head and spoke in a calm, almost human voice. "We never chase." Another stepped closer. "We wait." Lightning struck nearby. For a single second, the entire field became bright as daylight. Nathan finally understood why so many people disappeared. Hundreds of transparent human figures surrounded the jinn, silent, motionless, their faces frozen in terror. The missing drivers had never truly left the highway. They had become prisoners beside the creatures that had taken their lives. Nathan fired his service weapon. The bullets passed through the shadows as if they were smoke. The jinn smiled. One by one, they extinguished the patrol car's headlights without touching it. Darkness swallowed the highway. Then came the whispers. They sounded exactly like Nathan's wife. Then, like his daughter. Dad! The voices came from opposite directions. He knew neither of them could possibly be there. Still, instinct pulled him toward the sound. He took one step, then another. The whispers grew warmer, more convincing. Suddenly, another voice echoed through the darkness. It was the frightened dispatcher from the radio. "Don't follow the voices!" Nathan stopped, just before reaching a deep drainage pit hidden beside the road. Looking down, he froze. The bottom was filled with abandoned belongings. Police badges, shoes, phones, car keys, hundreds of them. Not accidents, trophies. The jinn had lured every victim away from the road using the voices of those they loved. Nathan stumbled backward and reached his vehicle. As the engine roared to leave, every shadow vanished. Only the rain remained. His report was never released to the public. The official explanation blamed dangerous weather and driver error. Months later, road workers installed new surveillance cameras along Black Mile. On the very first night, one camera captured a terrifying image. A line of travelers was walking silently across the highway. Men, women, children, all of them transparent. Behind them floated the same dark figures with glowing eyes. The footage lasted only 3 seconds before every camera failed. The next morning, the maintenance crew found no trace of anyone, except for one message scratched into the metal guardrail. If someone you love calls your name on Black Mile, keep driving. The marsh that remembered names. Deep within the Camargue wetlands in southern France lay Black Heron Marsh, a place surrounded by shallow water, twisted reeds, and endless mist. Fishermen avoided it after sunset, and even experienced guides refused to cross its muddy trails at night. They believed the marsh remembered every person who entered it, and sometimes called them back long after they had escaped. Detective Ethan Brooks, from the regional police, dismissed the legend as nothing more than local folklore. He had been assigned to investigate the disappearance of 2 wildlife photographers, whose abandoned boat had been found drifting near the edge of the marsh. Their cameras remained inside, but both memory cards were missing. Accompanied by local ranger Claire Morel, Ethan entered the wetlands just before dusk. The air was strangely still. There were no birds, no insects, only the slow movement of dark water beneath the reeds. "Stay on the marked path," Claire warned. "People who leave it often hear someone calling their name." Ethan smiled politely. "I've heard stranger stories." They continued deeper into the marsh until they found the missing boat lodged against a dead tree. Everything inside was covered with fresh mud, except for a small notebook. The last sentence written inside read, "If you hear your own voice, don't answer." Before Ethan could ask Claire about it, a whisper drifted across the water. "Ethan!" It sounded exactly like his own voice. He froze. Claire looked at him. "Did you hear something?" He hesitated. "No?" But the whisper came again. "Closer! Ethan! Over here!" The sound seemed to come from somewhere beyond the reeds. Ignoring Claire's warning, he stepped off the narrow path. The ground felt unusually soft beneath his boots. With every step, the fog thickened until Claire disappeared from sight. Then he saw someone standing in the distance. A man wearing a police jacket. The figure's back was turned. "Ethan!" Claire shouted somewhere behind him. The man slowly turned around. It was Ethan. Every detail was identical. The same face, the same uniform, even the same scar above his left eyebrow. His double smiled. "You've been looking for the missing people," it said calmly. "They're still here." The reflection-like figure pointed toward the dark water. Shapes began to rise beneath the surface. At first, they looked like floating branches. Then Ethan realized they were hands. Dozens of pale hands stretched silently upward before sinking beneath the water again. He stepped backward. His double did the same. Every movement matched perfectly. "You don't have to leave," the other Ethan whispered. "The marsh remembers everyone." Suddenly Claire burst through the reeds and grabbed his arm. "There is nobody there." She pulled him away. When Ethan looked again, the mysterious figure had vanished. Only still water remained. As they hurried back toward the boat, strange ripples followed them, although nothing could be seen beneath the surface. Just before reaching dry land, Ethan noticed footprints in the mud. Only one set. His own. Claire's footprints were missing entirely. He looked at her in confusion. She noticed them too. Without saying a word, they climbed into the boat and left the marsh. Back at the police station, investigators reviewed footage from Ethan's body camera. The recording showed him speaking alone in the fog for nearly 15 minutes. Claire never appeared on the video. When Ethan insisted she had been beside him the entire time, the officers exchanged uneasy glances. Official records revealed something impossible. There was no ranger named Claire Morel assigned to the reserve. No employment file. No his identification. No resident by that name in the surrounding villages. Days later, Ethan returned to the marsh with another search team. The abandoned boat was gone. The notebook had vanished. Nothing suggested anyone had ever been there. As he prepared to leave, he glanced across the silent water. Far away, standing among the reeds, was Claire. She smiled gently and raised one hand. Beside her stood another man. It was Ethan. Neither of them moved. Neither of them blinked. That night, Ethan found fresh mud on the floor of his apartment, leading from the front door to the bedroom mirror. When he looked into the glass, his reflection smiled a second too late. Then it quietly whispered, "Welcome back." The last lecture at Blackthorn College. Blackthorn College stood on a quiet hill in northern England, surrounded by ancient trees and heavy stone walls. During the day, it looked like an ordinary boarding school, with busy classrooms and cheerful students. At night, however, the campus changed. The halls became unnaturally silent. The lights flickered without reason, and an icy wind drifted through locked corridors. For decades, students whispered about an abandoned lecture hall beneath the oldest building. According to an old legend, a group of occult-obsessed students had once attempted to summon beings they called the Whispering Ones. The ritual was never completed, or so everyone believed. 17-year-old Ethan Walker dismissed the story as nothing more than a ghost tale meant to frighten first-year students. His best friend Noah loved mysteries and convinced Ethan to explore the forgotten basement after classes. Late one rainy evening, the two boys slipped into the underground corridor Dust covered the floor, yet strange footprints stretched toward a rusted iron door. The footprints were barefoot, but they ended abruptly in the middle of the hallway. Noah pushed the heavy door open. Inside waited an old lecture room. Rows of wooden seats faced a cracked blackboard covered with symbols no one could understand. The air felt strangely warm. As Ethan stepped forward, the classroom door slammed shut behind them. Every light went out. A deep whisper filled the darkness. It did not come from one direction. It came from everywhere. Then the emergency lights flickered on. Someone, or something, was sitting in the front row. The figure was tall, wrapped in darkness, with glowing eyes that reflected no light. Another appeared beside it. Then another. Within seconds, dozens of silent shapes occupied the seats. None of them looked completely human. Noah whispered, "Those aren't ghosts." The shadows slowly stood. Their movements were unnatural, bending with impossible grace. The symbols on the blackboard began to glow. A cold voice echoed through the room. The door was opened. The invitation was accepted. The creatures rushed forward. The lights exploded. Ethan grabbed Noah's arm and ran through the darkness. But the corridor seemed to stretch endlessly. Behind them came terrible screams. One by one, they suddenly stopped. When Ethan looked back, Noah was gone. Only his flashlight rolled across the floor before falling silent. The whispers became louder. Now they sounded like dozens of people speaking Ethan's name. He reached the stairwell and burst onto the main campus. The rain had stopped. Everything was quiet. Campus security searched the basement immediately. There was no lecture hall, only a sealed concrete wall where the entrance should have been. No trace of Noah was ever found. The police concluded that he had run away. Ethan knew the truth. 3 weeks later, strange deaths began across the college. A professor was found alone inside the library. There were no injuries, only an expression of overwhelming terror frozen on his face. A student disappeared from the music building. Security cameras showed her walking into an empty hallway. Moments later, every camera failed. She was never seen again. Others followed. Each victim had one thing in common. Before they vanished or died, they all reported hearing whispers coming from empty classrooms. Fear spread through Blackthorn College. Classes continued, but every corridor felt darker. Every shadow seemed alive. One stormy night, Ethan returned to the basement with Detective Sarah Collins, hoping to prove what he had witnessed. As midnight struck, the concrete wall cracked by itself. The hidden lecture hall slowly emerged from the darkness. The seats were no longer empty. Every missing student was sitting silently in perfect rows. Their faces were pale. Their eyes remained closed. At the front of the room stood the same towering figures. The jinn watched without moving. One of them slowly raised its hand. The students opened their eyes at the exact same moment. Their voices merged into one. "Leave before they notice you too?" Sarah pulled Ethan backward just as the lights shattered again. The hallway trembled. The wall sealed itself once more. Officially, the investigation ended without answers. The deaths remained unexplained. The disappearances became unsolved cases. Blackthorn College stayed open. Years later, new students still reported hearing whispers beneath the oldest building. Sometimes, late at night, a classroom appears on no map of the campus. Those who open its door always find every seat occupied. One chair, however, is always empty, waiting, not for a volunteer, for the next name the jinn have already chosen. The corridor that never ended. Detective Ethan Brooks had spent most of his career investigating missing persons across northern England. Every case eventually leads somewhere. A witness, a clue, a mistake. But one investigation brought him to a place where every answer seemed to disappear. Blackridge Manor had been abandoned for more than 40 years. Once a private boarding school, it now stood silent at the edge of a dense forest. Several teenagers who had entered the building out of curiosity claimed they had seen a corridor that did not exist on the official floor plans. One of them never returned. Ethan dismissed the stories as imagination mixed with fear. On a cold October evening, he entered the manor alone. The entrance hall was covered in dust, broken furniture, and faded portraits. His flashlight swept across cracked walls until it reached a narrow hallway, stretching into darkness. It looked ordinary. He walked forward. The corridor seemed longer than expected. Doors lined both sides, each one painted the same dull grey. Ethan opened the first door. An empty classroom? The second? A storage room? The third? Nothing. He continued walking. After several minutes, he noticed something impossible. The same painting of a black crow appeared beside every fifth door. He was certain he had already passed it. Thinking he had somehow walked in circles, Ethan scratched a small mark into the wall with his pocket knife. 10 minutes later, the scratch appeared again, exactly where it had been before. His radio crackled. "This is Officer Grant. Do you copy?" Ethan answered immediately. "I am inside the East Corridor." Static filled the speaker. Then another voice replied, a voice identical to his own. "I am inside the East Corridor." His heartbeat quickened. He switched the radio off. The silence that followed felt heavier than the darkness itself. Suddenly a distant door slammed shut. Then another. Then another. The sound moved slowly toward him, one door at a time. Bang, bang, bang. Every slam came closer. Ethan stepped backward. The corridor lights flickered to life without warning. At the far end stood a young boy wearing an old-school uniform. His face was pale. His hands rested calmly behind his back. "Are you lost?" Ethan asked. The boy smiled. "I stopped looking for the exit a long time ago." Before Ethan could speak again, the lights went out. When they returned a second later, the boy was gone. Only wet footprints remained on the dusty floor. They did not lead away. They ended directly in front of Ethan. A cold breath touched the back of his neck. He turned around. No one. But every classroom door was now open. Inside each room stood a single desk, and at every desk sat the same boy. All of them stared silently toward the corridor. Ethan ran. The hallway stretched farther with every step. The exit never came closer. Instead, he reached an old wooden clock hanging on the wall. Its hands pointed to 11:47. Neither hand moved. Beneath it lay a faded attendance register. He opened it. Dozens of names filled the pages. The final line had been written recently. Ethan Brooks, present. A school bell rang, somewhere deep inside the building. Every child lifted their head at exactly the same moment. Soft whispers drifted through the corridor. "Class is beginning." The voices grew louder. The walls trembled. The lights shattered one after another, leaving only darkness. Ethan closed his eyes and followed the faint breeze brushing against his face. After several desperate steps, his hand struck a heavy door. He pushed it open. Fresh air rushed toward him. He stumbled outside into the moonlight. Behind him, Blackridge Manor stood silent once again. The mysterious corridor was nowhere to be found. The police searched the building the following morning. The eastern wing ended after only 12 meters. There was no endless hallway, no classrooms, no clock. Nothing matched Ethan's report. The case was officially closed. Months later, Ethan developed the photographs taken during his investigation. Every picture showed empty hallways, except the last one. It captured Ethan standing alone in the corridor. Behind him, stretching endlessly into darkness, hundreds of children stood perfectly still. Each of them wore the same uniform. Each of them smiled. And at the very end of the corridor, the pale boy was raising one hand, as if inviting Ethan to come back for the next lesson.